I'm sure every artist has those terrible old OCs that were complete ripoffs of their favorite characters at the time that you've now since completely separated from their source material. We've all had those, right? Back in 2019, when I was only 11 years old, I was obsessed with the roblox.
There's roblox.
Particularly Roblox myths, which were basically like creepypastas, where someone would make a scary game in Roblox and add all these characters, and a few even had some pretty in-depth lore. One of my particular obsessions was called the Days Union, and I made tons of very cringy fan art that I posted on my old Amino account. Quick summary of the story: it was set in a dystopian future in an authoritarian city. There was 2 organizations that were in a never-ending war with each other, I believe. There were also around 12 characters in the Days Union. Each character was named after an adjective, usually a personality trait, and then ended with Day. Great Day was the leader, and there were a bunch of other characters called the operatives: Radiant Day, Emotionless Day, Benevolent Day, Unstable Day, and many more. As a kid, I had given them more human designs to fit my art style at the time, and since their characters were pretty much one note by design, I also riddled them with cringy headcanons, as preteen girls ought to. Some of it was truly gnarly. Just look at this. As the years went on, this myth slowly crumbled under its own weight by the admins and creators who turned out to be absolutely vile human beings. So it was officially put down like a sick animal around 2023. But I still like the designs I made for them, so I continue to use them on and off throughout the years. Wouldn't it be fun to completely revamp their story and designs and give them new concepts? So that is what I will be doing. Of course, the first step to any good character's conceptualization is the lore. Character designs are second. Now eat your vegetables. I'll be gathering references and organizing my ideas using today's sponsor, Milano. It's a great tool for organizing all types of creative projects, and I'm going to be using it for this new story. So first, what's the new synopsis? I'm thinking of a large hospital mixed with a rehabilitation center or a prison. The facility, which will be one of the main settings, is going to be called M.E.N.D. It stands for something, but I won't tell you yet. It's a center that aims to cure its inmates by way of some kind of brain transplant surgery. I haven't really thought of the details yet, but since the idea is already a bit dystopian, I created a mood board filled with old hospitals, vintage doctors, and bits of explanations for all my decisions, just to keep my usually chaotic thoughts organized. It was super easy to format. I just used one of the many templates that Milano offers. I used the column feature so that I wouldn't get lost in my own references and can easily identify which areas for clothing, the actual structure of the building, or just mid to late 20th century aesthetic I'm going for. I didn't end up using this feature for this board, but I love how Milano even has an audio embed feature, so if you make a board just for your original character, you can include their head and voice as well. And because Milano lets you create boards within boards, I can keep things like character lore, location references, and timeline details all nested and organized without having to scramble to find everything. And if an idea hits me when I'm away from my laptop, the Milanote mobile app syncs straight to the desktop so I can just add it on the go, and it's right there waiting for me when I get back. The Milanote web clipper lets you add images and references directly into your boards while you browse. No copy and pasting or screenshots required. For the location of the story, I'm definitely imagining a city somewhere in the northeastern part of the United States, where all the leaves are brown and the sky is gray. I also figured the genre was definitely going to lean more towards dystopian, mystery, and with a bit of psychological horror mixed in. I just created another board within my already existing one just to put a bunch of different posters in there. Now my ideas are actually readable enough to share with other people, which I can actually do either with or without editing access. Milano genuinely saved me so much time during the concept phase, so if you have your own stories and lore, or any other type of creative project, you can sign up to Milano for free, with no time limit, using the link in my description. Have fun! Alright, now that we have the basic rundown, I think I'm ready to introduce our new characters. I wanted to start off strong with our main protagonist, a down-on-her-luck journalist named Estera Wojcieska. Her original design gives me so much whiplash every time I look at it. She was based on this little pink-haired Roblox thing. I know. For some reason, I didn't draw a lot of female characters back then, so I don't have much art of her. After that, she went through quite a few iterations. At first, her name was Sydney, and her hair is in a bun. Then I changed her name to Sierra, and her hair was long, and she had thick eyebrows. At one point, her name was Antoinette, and she just looked literally exactly like me. At some point, I then created this drawing and thought it fit the vibe I was going for a lot more. Her name was Esther Sterling at the time, and she was British. Isn't sterling like a British currency or something, or an old currency? Her old personality was also nothing special. She was just nice, I guess. So for Estera's new story, she moved from her home country in Poland to a new city for better career opportunities, but she might have been a little in over her head and the prices hit her like a ton of brick. Not only that, Estera didn't know anyone there and had to work quite a few jobs besides her journalism career just to keep up with rent. But unwilling to give up on her passion just yet, Estera searches around for a documentary idea she's been trying to work on. She searched all over, but there was either nothing interesting or no one wanted to work with her. Just as she was about to call it quits, that's when she finds it, her golden ticket. On her television was a neurosurgeon on a talk show explaining his new rehabilitation center that claims to have come up with the ultimate cure to the city's crime rate for good. Estera begins paying attention and learns that the rehabilitation center is something called the M.E.N.D program. She learns that the man on the television was a doctor named Nicholas Moulton. His ultimate promise was to rid the most terrible criminals of their violent urges through a partial brain transplant, something that's literally never been done before and was thought to be impossible. He claimed it was nothing like the lobotomy, that was a barbaric surgery that stripped away a person's very soul. His process leaves the subject with their intellect and memories intact, and can even leave them at a higher level of functioning than they started with. The host didn't exactly look impressed, and was pressing him quite heavily, but Estera believed that this would be her big break. If she could get to this fast enough, she could actually make a name for herself, as being the first to get to such a groundbreaking story. The program had only been around for a couple years, and there were only a handful of men who'd successfully undergone the operation, though for privacy reasons, their names and faces were never shown, only voice testimonials. So the story begins, with Esther trying to find out who these patients are, which, simple enough, right? She has no idea that this simple search for a story will lead her down a dark, dark rabbit hole. Ooh, edgy. Basically, Estera is our catalyst for the story, but I'll talk a bit more about her character now. Estera is a very observant person, but she doesn't openly monologue her thoughts like some sort of detective or something. Estera stays quiet most of the time, even in high-stress situations, even if she internally is freaking out. She tries her best not to show too much emotion on her face. Sometimes her resting blank face can be to her detriment, as most people expect a female reporter to be more jovial or bubbly, even a bit flirtatious, but Estera is none of those things, and it tends to lead people to believe she's rude or disinterested. I also imagine she doesn't smile too much, or when she does, it'll be a small, polite one. Basically, you're probably not getting a teeth-baring grin from her. For her new design, because I forgot I need to talk about that too, I went for a simple, dull, kind of earthy color palette with the main contrast being her black hair and pale skin. In some of her earlier iterations, she was quite slim with very long hair, but that combination made her feel too graceful in a swan type of way. And I definitely wouldn't describe Estera as being like a swan. I imagine she's more like a lizard. I also gave her this fuck-ass bob and made her body type more on the average side, because most of the other characters are also average, so it just made sense for her. Okay, here is Estera. I'm not sure if I've been pronouncing her name correctly this time. Please let me know. But I love her. I love her. I love her. I didn't go into much detail about her relationships as I will with some of the other characters, because I didn't want to take away from her section too much, but don't worry, it'll be in each character's respective sections. Ooh, we're at the first cringe stir. This is Reynard Wilhelm. He is one of the many employees at the M.E.N.D facility and has also undergone many iterations throughout his time. They're not drastic, but it's more so in personality. He was originally a version of Radiant Day, who was like just a flirty, jovial guy, I guess. And I guess back then I thought that equaled hot and blonde. Jesus Christ. After I began straying away from the source material, I wasn't sure what to do with his personality, because he was kind of just an attractive, intelligent, kind man with no flaws. Just listen to his old fucking description. His name was Ramiro back then, and I quote, "Ramiro is an attractive man with a dapper and charming personality. He comes off as friendly enough and easygoing, always cracking jokes anytime he can. He's intelligent and has no problem questioning authority figures, even if it gets him into trouble. His kind and laid-back attitude makes many get comfortable with him rather quickly. He makes it a habit to always lighten up the mood around his workplace. Some find it endearing and others find it insufferable. Why would anyone find that insufferable? What? Like, okay, mister, you are not him. So I swung the pendulum and made him more flawed. For Reynard's new personality, I kept his happiness and whimsy, but I made it borderline maniacal. I love drawing his face in either these huge ugly grins or just any of the expression Jack Nicholson makes in The Shining. Reynard is one of the first employees of the psychoanalysis that Estera meets. Sort of like a pre-interview meetup, she figures the best place to get information on how the procedures work is to ask someone who works there. Seems simple enough. Too simple. I thought it'd be funny if Esther was imagining a completely different looking person and Reynard just comes in looking like how he looks and catches her off guard. Reynard is a very eccentric man who always seems delighted by the littlest of things, to an uncomfortable degree. Like, someone makes a mildly humorous comment, and once Reynard gets the joke, he starts cackling like a fucking madman. Like, there is absolutely no reason for that. Calm down. Reynard was being quite obsequious when talking to Estera, and while she saw right through it, she just decided to let him do it anyways. Yeah, it was off-putting, but nothing to write home about, right? As I mentioned before, Reynard is a therapist, but he likes to think he's above basic psychology, and is very fascinated with more avant-garde tactics, for lack of a better word. Due to the nature of the M.E.N.D program, he works with quite violent people, but he always treats the patients as if they were his friends, and he often refers to them as that as well. Instead of patients, he says friend, because client and patient implies a power dynamic that he doesn't like. They're all on the same level. Like I said, Reynard has some pretty terrible fucking advice. He's not a very good therapist. And for the people with more violent tendencies, he basically tries to convince them that instead of directing their violence outward, it's much more productive to direct it towards yourself. As malicious as this sounds, which it absolutely is, Reynard would never give advice he wouldn't do himself. And he quite often does this himself. Reynard actually used to be a patient of M.E.N.D and was cured via the partial brain transplant surgery. As you see, this will be a pattern with most of the M.E.N.D employees. Reynard still has most of his core memories intact, like he knows the city he grew up in, his culture, and loved ones, but since half of his brain is replaced with someone else's, how he feels about his memories is completely skewed. Things that were traumatic, he remembers fondly, and the surgery also had a few unintended side effects. He's also terrible with numbers and tends to forget how old he currently is or was at any given time. He kind of has a lot of brain fog when it comes to dates of specific events. Just to end this off, if you follow me on Toy House, you'd know this man is also a freak. Yes, he is on that freak. He's completely on that freak timing. I didn't know where to mention it because it is important to his character, but I can't go into detail on it. So if you're wondering, damn, why is this section so short? It's because of that. I guess I can talk about how it relates to his design for a quick sec, because with his freak meter just being off the charts, it's why I decided to design him with a less visually appealing combination of facial features. Because I feel like it makes it easier to identify that, this dude is a goof. Like, oh, that he is he is insane. Rather than he's a hot, sexy alpha boyfriend or something. I don't know. Here is the funny man. Here he is. Here, I can't stand him. I can't stand him. Edward is our second M.E.N.D employee in the lineup, and also the character who probably has had the least amount of changes since inception. His full name is Edward Sullivan. He's 55 years old and works as a criminal psychiatrist in the facility. He's also British. Despite his design staying mostly consistent, he's been in a few completely different worlds in his time. At first he was just in the modern times, I guess. I mean, he looks to be holding some type of coffee or Starbucks here. He had a black turtleneck with a suit jacket combo because that was literally my favorite thing to draw older characters wearing. Then I guess I got bored, so I put him in like a fantasy world as a soldier, I guess, as he was racist. Like, I wrote that down as being one of his traits. His name was also Emmett Canderson. That sounds like a name you give a fucking Muppet or something. it certainly doesn't fit his supposedly super intimidating character. Also, can we just appreciate how he literally looks like a 30-year-old man with gray hair here? As I've developed this story, Edward was one of those characters I really didn't have much ideas with, at least in terms of how he fits into the narrative, so bear with me here. Personality-wise, he's a very intellectual type of guy, almost to his detriment. His work at the facility has made him very cynical and jaded, and have very low standards for who he considers a decent person. He's one of the first people to have undergone the brain transplant. He wasn't a violent criminal in his past, per se. He was more so a victim of very unfortunate circumstances. So he wasn't really on anyone's radar or anything, nor did his crime really make the news. At the facility, they weren't exactly sure how the surgery would affect him, or if he would even be the same person at all, because the point of the surgery isn't exactly to completely replace the original person, but that's basically what happened with him. I also added that Edward is a bit sickly due to the anti-rejection medication he's on, because I feel like that would make sense. Pretty sure that's one of the major complications with transplants today. Even though this is technically a science fiction world, you still gotta have a little bit of something. I say as I'm talking about brain transplants, which do not exist. That's why when any of the other characters see younger pictures of Edward, they just think, what happened? How did he go from this meek little, dumb little guy to this jaded old man who's literally frustrated by his own intellect? I don't imagine Edward has many interactions with Estera, but the few times he does is when Reynard invites her over to their home, which is like a little townhouse or something, which is kind of like a little townhouse. This is also when we find out that Edward and Reynard are roommates for an indefinite amount of time. Yay! These two, they certainly have a relationship. Their dynamic is best described as a constant power play. Like, technically they do care about each other, but more in the way that they're both thinking, I can fix him at the same time. I have more detail, but I don't think I can get into that right now. I know I have some people in the audience who love them some toxic dynamics, so here you are, sweetie. It's your favorite. Eat up. Okay, yeah, that's it for Edward. His section is shorter because he's not as integral to the main plot. Most of his intrigue comes from his backstory, but I didn't think it makes sense to go into that in this video. Maybe next time. For some reason, he ended up looking very endearing to me. That was not my intention, but for some reason, I think he was kind of cute. I don't know. He's just an old man. Our next character is a man named Malcolm Dean. Malcolm is originally hired by Estera to do some digging into the psychoanalysis after she had some unsatisfying interviews with a few of the people who worked there. Each one just left her with more questions than answers. Malcolm is a private detective, and by happenstance, he's also been looking into the program for months now, though his reasonings are far more personal than Estera's. Malcolm is your typical gruff, no-nonsense, divorced ex-cop in his late 30s who hasn't known what to do with himself after he's separated from his spouse. One thing different about Malcolm than the other characters is that he does not have an original counterpart from the Days Union or any one of my old stories. He's a new character I made for this story in particular. For his personality, he's meant to bounce off Estera and kind of be a counter to her. Estera thinks a lot but doesn't act, and Malcolm acts before he thinks. He can be a bit of a know-it-all, which leads him to jump to conclusions way faster than he should. Malcolm is extremely distrusting of anyone even associated with the psychoanalysis institution, and sees the whole operation as entirely evil. Makes sense. All of the employees of M.E.N.D are on his suspicion list, but Reynard is number one. His name is circled in pen. His theatrics pissed Malcolm off already, coupled with the fact this guy avoids questions like a freaking pro. While Esther is still curious about the program despite her suspicions, Malcolm does not give a damn. He just wants them gone. All he knows is they're letting these criminals get off scot-free, absolved of all their crimes as they get to live their lives having forgotten everything they've done. All while those affected by them are the ones who are forced to live with the consequences. Malcolm himself has to live with the consequences. No, I said too much. The backstories are for another time. One thing I definitely want to get across with this story is that none of the characters are entirely on the same page, especially the two main characters. Estera is like, I hired you to do this one thing, and you're doing all these side quests. And Malcolm is like, bitch, I do this for free. Like, just fire me. But while they might butt heads a lot on the reasonings, their primary goal is the same. Find out what is up with this place. For Malcolm's design, I went for a very classic 1970s detective look with the brown mullet, trench coat, and slacks. He's not meant to particularly stand out, so his design is fairly boring, I'd say. But one thing I did also want to avoid was him being too, like, Americana tough guy core, because sometimes he does lean into that. I just decided to give him a few quirks, because as much as I love lore, I also love giving my characters random quirks. He cannot smoke to save his life. He will die. He keeps trying, but it's never works because he's always a coughing mess. Also, he's not always level-headed and makes some quite irrational decisions at times that might mess a few things up, probably. Here is Malcolm, our little detective. I love Malcolm because he's so plain, simple, like, you know what you're getting with him, and that's what I love, you know? We are now getting into one of our primary workers at M.E.N.D. He's not a villain, per se, no. But an antagonist, maybe. He's a problem. And that man is named Feng Guangxu. Now, he was technically the equivalent of one of the Roblox guys, Great Day. Then he became an OC of my own, and he used to be a lot of things, including very pale. But then I got the idea that he'd be some sort of founder of the psychoanalysis, perhaps. For some reason back then, I gave him a military uniform, even though he is not and was never in the army. He was also a politician at some point. Listen, I just had a phase, I guess. When I first came up with this story, he was the main villain and everyone else was just the poor little victims. But when the lineup looked like this, oh, that did not feel good. And, you know. But that's not even really a problem anymore because everyone's evil, no one here is the victim, and he's not even our primary antagonist anymore. My new idea for Guangxu is still by all technicalities an antagonistic role, or an oppositional role to the main character's goals, which is to find out what is up with the program. He does not want them to do that. Guangxu is now the co-owner of the Psychoanalysis Institution because I couldn't imagine him being the type of guy who would like being in the spotlight, and I feel like him coming up with a groundbreaking surgery wouldn't be something he'd do. Guangxu had a very typical, straight-faced, stoic, absolutely nothing affected him, and he's such a nonchalant king, but oh my god, is that personality type so fucking like, I'm asleep, I'm sleeping. While I still like it, I wanted to add a little spice because yes, Guangxu presents as a very level-headed, pragmatic man, and he does practice some level of stoicism. He has a fierce, almost delusional loyalty to the program. He believes it's the ultimate good, the ultimate grace. His loyalty also extends to the program's main founder, but I'm not going to get into him yet. Okay, so basic info. Guangxu is 38 years old. He's also a doctor, but I think he's more so in the medical researcher category, which might be a type of doctor. The doctor label is kind of vague, like what was he, a chiropractor or something? I'm thinking beginning of the story, Guangxu does not like our girl Estera or Malcolm and thinks they're being way too nosy and should just mind their own business. Guangxu is a very straightforward thinker, so any disruption to his plans or expectations immediately ruins his entire week. If I could redo one thing about his reference, I would add a bit more variety to his facial expressions because I don't feel like it captures the underlying layers of his personality too much, because I thought it'd be funny if he was the type of character who didn't make a lot of emotion, but I don't like that. So, Guangxu is extremely persistent about absolutely nothing getting out about M.E.N.D, and especially anything unsavory getting out about its founder. At first, Guangxu just kind of tries to politely dissuade her investigation by just explaining the basics and hoping that will quell her curiosity. He even goes as far as to give her a small tour of the facility, but that wasn't enough, because he realized quickly that they weren't exactly only curious, they wanted the truth. They wanted answers, and that is unacceptable. After Guangxu realizes that his polite verbal attempts to dissuade her don't work, he basically takes to stalking Estera and trying to intimidate her. He's not necessarily doing anything at first, just making sure she doesn't go out spilling any sensitive information to unwanted people. Estera's only mildly put off by him at first because she doesn't exactly know what he's doing or how a little bit crazy he can be. This is a little tidbit for his character, but I thought it would be an interesting thing to add that he isn't exactly the most emotionally regulated person on the planet. He has his moments of outbursts, but not necessarily in public or anything. Not yet, at least. Here is the man, Guangxu. I think I kind of like him better as a character than his design. It is plain. I imagine when he's in a lab, he just wears a white coat over it. The one behind it all. The charming Dr. Estera saw on the television, and the founder of the psychoanalysis, Nicholas Moulton. Similarly to Malcolm, he doesn't actually have a cringy older version, and was made specifically for this story. His birth name was Nikolai Morozov, but changed it to something more westernized to fit his public image of people seeing him as a benevolent, innovative doctor. If you're thinking, well, why would he need to do that? This is largely due to what I believe was called the Red Scare at the time. For those who don't know, 1971 is still in the midst of the Cold War, which was the... What is this script? Which was the 45-year-long dick measuring contest between the United States and the Soviet Union. Americans at that time were scared as hell that spies were listening in on their conversations. It's the same type of paranoia I tend to get when I look through the TikTok search bar and it says, if you hear this, you need to run. People were very quick to label people as being communists, which, back then, ooh, that's not good. While today, being called a commie is just an everyday occurrence on the internet, back then, if you were suspected of being a communist or a foreign spy, you can pretty much say goodbye to your entire livelihood. I probably did not need to explain that, but that's just some historical context for you. And obviously, Nikolai does not want that for himself. As I said, Nikolai is the founder of the M.E.N.D program, but he's also the inventor of the brain transplant surgery. I am well aware this is completely impossible in real life, and even less plausible back then, but it's technically not a full transplant. Just a partial one. But before this, it was thought to be entirely impossible due to its extreme complexity. But Nikolai was the first to actually perform a successful human-to-human partial brain transplant in 1969, just 2 years after the first successful heart transplant in 1967. Shut up. While some celebrated this great medical feat, many criticized the ethical implications of what Nikolai's plan for his program are. Nikolai simply brushes these off though, claiming the naysayers are simply being too conservative. After all, every great achievement in history started out as a crazy idea, right? Despite all of this, all of Nikolai's accolades and public appearances, not much is known about the doctor, where he studied, is he married, or his reasoning for starting this program at all. Outside of just lowering crime rates, there had to be something else, right? When Estera finally meets Nikolai for the first time during an interview with him, he's very cordial, of course, but she also notes an almost childlike excitement that he has as he explained his vision, as he talked about all the big plans he had to further the development of M.E.N.D, and what a miracle it was to society. He spoke of his philosophy, of how he believes some are born with what he describes as a defect, and that this defect is responsible for all the horrors we find in the world today. In fact, he didn't believe crime was a byproduct of misfortune or harsh environments, but a disease that quite literally needed to be cut out of the body like a tumor. Estera didn't exactly expect a man of his caliber to be into superstition, but weirder things have happened, right? As she was closing up, she asked Nikolai one question. If you could say just one thing to your critics, what would you say? With a clap of his hands, he smiles and says, "You will all see in due time." Oh, okay. Finally, here is Nikolai. I'm kind of scared about him, I'm not gonna lie to you, but he's one of my favorites because of his lore, and don't get me started. For this section, I just want to explain a little bit about how the surgery affects the patients, because I realized I didn't really explain how I wanted it to work. Obviously, in our world, brain transplants have never been performed on a human, or any living being for that matter, I don't think. Because not only is it logistically impossible to perform on a human due to us dying instantly without our brains, brain cells die way too quickly after you cut it away from its source anyways. But, let me tell you this isn't real. So I can do what I want. Any medical students currently watching this, please cover your ears. Basically, they replace the amygdala that is seen to be defective with that of a recently deceased person, usually like an upstanding member of society or any generally decent people, quote unquote. The goal of the program performing this on criminals specifically, typically violent crimes, not like tax evasion or something, to get rid of the impulse to commit crime which they're believed to have. In Dr. Morozov's words, all crime starts with a disease of the mind. You cure the mind, you cure society. Though the patients don't lose their core memories, after the surgery, the new amygdala is still forming connections and rewiring itself to the existing parts of the brain. And any memories during the recovery period are either completely forgotten or extremely blurry, like an old dream you had 10 years ago. And also about the core memories, while they're there, they can still recall events that happened to them in the past. The emotions attached to said memory are lost during the process, so sometimes that means the emotional connection they had to their family or loved ones is either severed or strained. But hey, at least they're better men because of it, right? And that is your introduction to the psychoanalysis. That's the title of the story, that because it just made sense. Sincerely, I hope you enjoyed this video. You trucked through it, soldier. I'm proud of you. I am posting the art I make of them on my Instagram and TikTok, so if you want to see more of their faces, you can follow me on there. I hope I maybe inspired you to write your own lore. And that is it for now. Goodbye.